Imagine, imagine a man who is clinically blind, right? But he claims he can perceive the exact, energetic blueprint of your nervous system.
Right.
And now imagine he uses that specific non-physical sight to perform remote, essentially open heart surgery on the biological systems of tonal patients from, thousands of miles away.
Which, I mean, it sounds completely absurd at first.
Totally. It sounds like straight up science fiction. But when you actually start unpacking the mechanics of what the source material says is happening here, it forces this complete reevaluation of what human biology is actually capable of.
It really does. Because we are looking at a fundamentally different paradigm of human potential today in this deep dive. We're moving entirely away from the sort of cultural commodification of spirituality and stepping into a highly technical, really high-stakes physiological reality.
Yeah, because that commodification is just everywhere now. I mean, the word enlightenment has basically been hijacked.
Oh, absolutely.
You look at modern wellness culture, and we've taken these ancient, incredibly dangerous, esoteric survival states and stripped them down into, marketable productivity tools.
Right. It's an aesthetic now.
Exactly. You see the word slapped onto a $150 yoga mat, or used to describe a certain vibe, expensive green tea, a perfectly curated minimalist living room. And there's this weird promise that if you just breathe right, you'll be totally unbothered by your email inbox. It treats enlightenment as a mood, just a synonym for feeling vaguely relaxed.
Yeah, it reduces this massive evolutionary biological transformation into a lifestyle brand. And when we examine the historical source material, and specifically the insights of the figure we're analyzing today, enlightenment is explicitly not a mood.
Not even close.
No. It isn't a psychological attitude you adopt to, deal with a frustrating commute. It is a fundamental structural shift in the actual physics of how a human nervous system operates. We are analyzing massive biological rewiring here, radical shifts in the subjective perception of time, and a capacity to interact with matter and energy that modern quantum biology is really only just beginning to have the vocabulary to even conceptualize.
Well, and our guide through the source material today takes an absolute sledgehammer to that lifestyle brand definition.
He really does.
His name is Osman. He's often referred to as the blind Muslim yogi, and his background alone is just this fascinating collision of frameworks. You have the deep, ecstatic, devotional aspects of Islamic Sufism colliding with the very structural, mechanical precision of ancient yogic traditions.
Right.
And all of that is filtered through an intensely rigorous, almost clinical scientific perspective.
Yeah, he brings a profound level of empirical data to the table. I mean, we are looking at the insights of a man with 50 years of dedicated internal practice and, 46 years of teaching experience.
Yeah, 46 years.
Half a century of testing these biological variables. And the critical variable that frames his entire current perspective is his lack of physical sight. He has been clinically blind for the last 2.5 years.
Right. But it's not what we think of as blindness.
Yeah, exactly. His blindness doesn't result in a perception of darkness or just a void. He processes the environment around him as visible energy fields.
Which is wild, and we're going to get into the specific mechanics of how his brain decodes that energy later, because it's honestly mind-bending.
It is.
But the stakes of this deep dive, they come from his actual profession. Osman is a bioenergy healer, but he operates in a very specific, frankly terrifying niche. He specializes almost entirely in critical care recovery and terminal illnesses.
Right. He steps in when allopathic medical science has essentially reached the end of its algorithmic capacity. Vitals are dropping. Cascaded organ failure is initiating. The physiological systems are just shutting down.
The end of the line.
The absolute end of the line. And he claims an impeccable success record in these dire life or death scenarios, intervening remotely to reboot the biological software of the patient. But the source material makes it explicitly clear that this is not a gentle process at all. It involves a massive, literal risk of entropy transfer to himself.
Yeah, he is operating in the absolute emergency room of human consciousness. And, to understand how any of that is mechanically possible, how you bypass the physical eyes, how you alter terminal biology from a distance, we really have to start by looking at the hardware we are currently running on.
We do.
Osman deconstructs human consciousness into distinct levels, starting with level 1. The baseline reality. And for almost everyone listening to this right now, your brain is currently locked in what he identifies as the beta frequency.
Right. The beta brainwave state is basically the default operating system for modern survival. Neurologically, when your brain is producing beta waves, which is typically between 14 and 30 hertz, it is engaged in constant rapid, outward-facing data processing.
Scanning everything.
Scanning everything. The amygdala is highly active. The HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, is primed. You are perpetually looking at the environment for threats, calculating social dynamics, navigating complex logical tasks.
But the problem, right, is that our biology evolved to use that beta state for acute temporary threats, like a predator in the bushes, a rival tribe,
Yeah.
a tiger jumping out at you.
Exactly. Short bursts of adrenaline.
Right. But modern society requires us to live in that state chronically. Your nervous system is perceiving a passive-aggressive email from your boss, or like a sudden drop in your stock portfolio with the exact same physiological panic as a physical attack.
Which is unsustainable.
It's a low-grade, continuous state of fight or flight.
And the physiological cost of that chronic beta state is immense. I mean, it involves sustained cortisol release, which degrades the immune system, shortens telomeres, and creates this feeling of chaotic fragmentation. Your attention is fractured across 100 different survival imperatives simultaneously.
It's that inner monologue that never shuts up, right? You're trying to focus on a spreadsheet, but a background process in your brain is worrying about a mortgage payment, while another process is reacting to a push notification on your phone. It's exhausting.
It's a massive drain on the system.
But Osman introduces level 1.5, which is the alpha state. And this isn't a state of sleep. You are fully awake, interacting with the world, but the actual frequency of the electrical pulses in your brain has slowed down to roughly 8 to 12 hertz.
Yeah, the shift from beta to alpha represents this really vital transition from sympathetic nervous system dominance, the fight or flight, to parasympathetic activation. The physical sensation is one of profound physiological stability.
You just feel grounded.
Very grounded. That frantic reactive edge dissolves. You observe and respond to stimuli rather than reacting out of ingrained evolutionary fear. And Osman provides a deeply practical case study from his own life regarding the utility of this state. He notes that he naturally transitioned into alpha as his baseline operating system around the age of 12.
Which is crazy because most 12-year-olds are absolute chaos.
Complete chaos.
They are pure beta panic, navigating the social hierarchy of middle school and all those hormonal changes. But his teachers and peers noticed he possessed this bizarre, unshakable stability. And he attributes his entire professional survival as an adult to maintaining this specific biological state. I mean, he's been a self-employed entrepreneur for 30 years.
And the source highlights a brutal metric regarding entrepreneurship here. A massive percentage of new businesses fail within the first 2 years. And the failure isn't always due to market fit or flawed business models.
No, it's burnout.
It is frequently because the chronic beta wave stress of constant uncertainty, financial pressure, and decision fatigue literally degrades the founder's nervous system until they just collapse.
Right.
Osman argues that surviving 3 decades in that high-variance environment requires a brain that does not chemically fry itself under pressure. He navigated that minefield specifically because his baseline frequency was alpha.
See, and that takes the concept of spiritual practice completely out of the monastery. It's not about escaping society to sit in a cave. It is a highly evolved biological productivity tool.
Absolutely.
If the beta state is, well, let's say it's like trying to drive your car down the highway while you have your foot slammed on the gas, but your other foot is simultaneously riding the brake pad.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. The engine is screaming, you're burning through fuel, the brake pads are smoking. Shifting to alpha is essentially just taking your foot off the brake. The internal friction disappears.
The engine just runs at optimal efficiency. But, as optimized as alpha is for navigating the external world, the sources indicate it is merely the lobby of human potential.
Just the waiting room.
Just the waiting room. To access genuine spiritual technology, you have to physically unplug the sensory inputs from the processing center. You descend the ladder to level 2, which is the theta state.
Now, we usually associate theta waves, which are much slower, around 4 to 8 hertz, with REM sleep, right? It's the dream state, or what happens during deep hypnosis.
Yes, normally.
But entering theta while you are fully conscious and sitting upright produces some bizarre physical phenomena. Reality begins to bend, linear logic breaks down, and thoughts become incredibly lateral and visual.
And physical.
Yeah, you get those sudden violent muscle jerks, hypnic jerks, as the somatic nervous system powers down its external reliance. It's like when you're falling asleep and you suddenly kick your leg.
Exactly. But the defining characteristic here is Osman's mechanical control over this descent. The text notes that the average person drifting from waking consciousness into a theta state requires roughly 20 minutes of slow, gradual physiological
A
shifting.
slow slide down.
Right. But Osman can execute the transition from wide-awake alpha to deep theta in 2 to 5 seconds.
Wait, how is that neurologically possible? Does he just sever the optical nerve and go deaf on command? Like, how do you just shut it off?
Well, the physical apparatus remains active. The sound waves in the room are still striking his tympanic membrane. The photons are still hitting his retina. The concept at play here is pratyahara.
The yogic science of sensory withdrawal.
Exactly. Mechanically, this involves the thalamus, which is the brain's sensory relay station. Instead of processing the incoming data and sending it to the cortex for conscious perception, an individual trained in pratyahara actively gates the thalamus.
So they just block the signal?
The signal reaches the brainstem but is intentionally ignored. You remain sharply internally awake, but you become functionally deaf and numb to the environment.
Wow. So you've unplugged the monitor and the keyboard, but the CPU is still running at maximum capacity in the dark.
That's precisely it.
And that darkness is necessary to reach the actual engine room of the human machine, which is level 3, the delta state.
Yes. Delta waves are the slowest and highest amplitude brain waves, operating between 0.5 and 4 hertz. In normal human biology, this is the realm of stage 4, deep, dreamless sleep.
Right. The dead to the world sleep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In classical meditation architecture, this correlates with a state called nirvikalpa. It translates to a state devoid of fluctuations or modifications of the mind. The default mode network of the brain, the interconnected regions responsible for your sense of ego, your autobiographical memory, that constant self-referential inner narrative is entirely shut down.
So there's no me anymore.
There is no emotional processing. There is no conscious thought formulating the idea I am currently meditating. The construct of the self temporarily dissolves into pure, unlabeled existence.
And the source material dives into the physics of time perception while a practitioner is holding waking consciousness in this delta state, which is fascinating. Osman describes sitting in meditation for 18 to 20 hours straight.
A massive amount of time.
Right. To an external observer, a full day and night passes. But he reports that to his subjective internal perception, the experience felt like 20 or 30 minutes.
And the mechanics of how human consciousness constructs the sensation of time passing are deeply relevant here.
Wait, let's explore the physics of that for a second, because how does 18 hours physically compress into 20 minutes in the brain?
Well, think about what time actually is to the brain.
Right. Time for human beings is essentially just a measurement of sequence. We measure time by physical markers. You feel an itch on your knee. Then you have a random thought about what you want for dinner. Then you notice a shadow moving across the wall.
Exactly.
The space between those sequential events is what creates the feeling of time passing. If you enter delta and completely shut down the thalamus, you remove the markers. The sequence stops.
The perception of duration requires change. Sensory change, emotional change, cognitive change. In the nirvikalpa delta state, internal and external change reaches absolute zero. It is a biological vacuum.
So the clock just stops ticking internally.
Without sequential markers to process, the subjective architecture of time completely collapses. Whether a minute passes or a century, the subjective neurological experience is identical.
That is incredible. But entering delta isn't just a magic trick to fast forward through a boring day, right? The text emphasizes that delta is a non-negotiable biological requirement for human survival. It is the deep cellular repair protocol.
It really is. It is the only state where specific restorative functions occur. During delta sleep, the brain triggers the release of human growth hormone, facilitating tissue repair and muscle growth. Furthermore, the glymphatic system becomes highly active.
Wait, so that's the literal power washing.
Exactly. It's essentially power washing the brain with cerebrospinal fluid to clear out metabolic waste products like amyloid beta plaques, which accumulate during your waking hours.
It's gunk from the day.
Yes. And the source uses the mechanics of alcohol consumption to illustrate what happens when you block this state.
Because most people assume a hangover is just severe dehydration, right? Drink a glass of water, you'll be fine. But it's much more structural than that.
Way more. Alcohol is a chemical depressant that acts heavily on the GABA receptors. It forces the user into unconsciousness quickly, but it catastrophically disrupts sleep architecture. It physically prevents the brain from generating those slow-wave delta frequencies.
So you pass out, you are completely dead to the world, but your brain is trapped in a lighter, chaotic electrical frequency.
You are basically awake in a coma.
Wow. You are unconscious, but the glymphatic system isn't triggering, the neurotoxins aren't being flushed. So you wake up feeling like absolute garbage because your nervous system was denied the specific electrical frequency required to initiate the repair sequence. Delta is the bedrock of your biology.
It is. And the profound implication of the source material is what happens when a practitioner doesn't just visit delta randomly during the night, but intentionally holds waking consciousness in that specific frequency for an extended duration.
Which takes some serious stamina.
It does. Osman notes that sustaining unbroken silence in delta for roughly 90 minutes acts as a biological trigger. It initiates a massive neurochemical cascade known as samadhi.
Samadhi. Now, in the ancient texts, it translates to Sat Chidananda truth, consciousness, and bliss. But we really need to separate that from the modern idea of bliss. This isn't the psychological happiness of like getting a promotion or eating a really great meal. The text is describing a violent, overwhelming biochemical flood.
It is intensely physical. The brain is signaled to synthesize and release massive quantities of endogenous neurochemicals. We are looking at the internal production of N-dimethyltryptamine, DMT, likely synthesized in the pineal gland or lungs, alongside a massive release of endogenous cannabinoids and powerful endorphins.
So the chemical payload is virtually identical to taking a heroic dose of a synthesized psychedelic.
Biologically, yes.
But the text draws a massive distinction between the two experiences.
But that distinction lies entirely in control and agency. When a chemical psychedelic is introduced externally, it forces the brain's receptors open. It is a chaotic flood that the user cannot regulate, frequently leading to paranoia, fragmented perception, and a terrifying loss of autonomy.
Right, you're just along for the ride.
Exactly. Because samadhi is self-induced through extreme disciplined focus and the stabilization of the nervous system, it is highly coherent. It is pure, targeted neurochemical ecstasy without the entropic chaos of an external substance.
But that ecstasy has an immense physical weight to it. The text describes it as hitting like a, quote, ton of bricks.
It really does.
It is a voltage so high that the human nervous system literally struggles to conduct the current. I mean, Osman shares a story from when he was 19. He was engaged in an intense devotional chanting practice. He hit that specific frequency the samadhi state triggered, and the biochemical bliss hit him with such force that his physical body short-circuited. He collapsed and went completely unconscious.
His wiring couldn't handle the load.
Exactly. And the energetic redistribution in the brain during these states is absolute.
It is. The source details an account of a practitioner who managed to maintain the samadhi state for an hour, just 1 hour. The neurological after effects were so profound that this individual was entirely mute for 40 days.
40 days, like not a single word.
Not one word.
It's almost like if your body is the hardware, samadhi is a critical, massive operating system update. The download requires so much processing power that the system forces non-essential applications to shut down. Broca's area, the speech center of the brain, is just taken offline because all the voltage is being routed to process this chemical bliss.
And we see this exact physiological overwhelming documented across various traditions. Gopi Krishna, a prominent 20th century mystic, wrote extensively about his own spontaneous awakening, describing it neurologically as a flow of liquid light that violently overloaded his spinal cord and brain,
Just completely frying the circuits.
leaving him physically incapacitated for months as his nervous system adapted to the new baseline. And the source introduces the historical figure of Mirabai to demonstrate that the trigger for this cascade isn't strictly technical.
Right, because Mirabai didn't sit in a cave practicing rigid breath work or sensory withdrawal. She triggered these massive biological states entirely through ecstatic devotion. Pure, single-pointed emotional focus through singing and dancing. Which proves that the biology doesn't care about this specific technique, right?
No, it doesn't.
It responds to the absolute intensity of focus that drives the brain into that zero-point state.
The biological response is completely agnostic to the method of induction. However, this brings us to the most vital warning contained in the source material.
Okay, what is that?
Experiencing samadhi, feeling that mind-shattering endogenous biochemical bliss, feels like arriving at the ultimate destination. But mistaking the experience of samadhi for a permanent state of enlightenment is a profound structural error that traps countless practitioners.
Hey, if an overwhelming experience of absolute truth and bliss isn't enlightenment, what is?
The source clarifies this through the analogy of the flashlight versus the sun. It differentiates between a temporary neurochemical state and an irreversible physiological mutation.
Okay, lay out the mechanics of the flashlight for me.
Think about it like this. Entering samadhi, is akin to turning on a remarkably powerful flashlight in a pitch-black room. For the duration of the battery life, the duration of your meditation, the duration of the chemical flood, everything is brilliantly illuminated. The hidden structures of reality are visible.
You can see everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
But eventually, the meditation ends. The endogenous chemicals metabolize and dissipate. The flashlight turns off, and your consciousness is plunged back into the dark room of normal, fragmented beta wave reality.
Ah. And enlightenment is the alternative.
Enlightenment is the sun rising. It is not an experience you enter and exit. The light is omnipresent, illuminating the landscape 24 hours a day without fluctuation or the need for sustained effort. It is a permanent structural shift in the baseline of consciousness.
But how do you verify that objectively? Because, let's be real, anyone can write a book and claim their internal sun is shining all the time.
Right.
The source material outlines an incredibly brutal binary metric to prove this. It's known as the sleep test.
Yes. The sleep test strips away all subjective claims of spiritual attainment. According to this physiological framework, a truly enlightened nervous system maintains an unbroken, continuous stream of lucid conscious awareness through all three states of human existence: waking, the theta dream state, and the deep, dreamless delta state.
Wait, so if your head hits the pillow, your brainwaves slow down into delta, and your conscious awareness blinks out. Like, if you experience a gap in your consciousness, you fail the test.
You fail. You are not fully enlightened.
That is a high.
The highest. The background awareness must never flicker, regardless of the biological state of the body. The text recounts a really visceral historical account from Autobiography of a Yogi to illustrate the extreme nature of this unbroken awareness.
The interaction between Yogananda and his guru, Sri Yukteswar.
Exactly. Yogananda is present in the room while his guru is in a state of deep nirvikalpa samadhi. Yogananda observes his teacher's physical body. There is no respiration. There is no detectable pulse. The body is entirely rigid, displaying the physiological markers of rigor mortis.
Wow.
To any modern medical diagnostic tool, Sri Yukteswar is clinically deceased.
So Yogananda naturally assumes his teacher has died in his chair. He panics and reaches out to touch the body to check for any residual sign of life. And before his hand even makes contact, the supposedly dead master snaps, "Don't touch me."
Sri Yukteswar's biological functions were entirely suspended, yet his conscious awareness of the environment, Yogananda's emotional state of panic, and the physical proximity of his hand was razor-sharp and immediate.
He was processing the external world without utilizing his physical sensory organs at all.
None of them. The text also points to Ramana Maharshi, who existed in what is termed Sahaja Samadhi.
Sahaja translates to effortless, right?
Yes. For Maharshi, this unbroken continuum of absolute awareness was his default waking state. He did not require isolation or seated meditation to maintain it. The sun was simply up, continuously, while he engaged in normal conversation or daily tasks.
Which brings us back to Osman. Here is a man who can manipulate his brainwaves in seconds, who can suspend his perception of time, and whose energetic capacity allows him to intervene in terminal illnesses. Yet he categorically states on the record that he is not enlightened.
It is a remarkable display of intellectual honesty. He admits that he still loses his continuity of consciousness when he transitions into the dream state. Furthermore, his access to samadhi still requires active management and induction. It is not his effortless default baseline. Therefore, by his own rigorous metric, he fails the sleep test.
You know, I have to play devil's advocate here regarding the sleep test.
Sure.
Because it sounds fundamentally post-human. I mean, my consciousness flickers if I'm watching a slightly boring documentary after a long day at work. Is maintaining a 24/7 omnidirectional awareness through deep sleep actually a human capability? Or does passing this test require mutating into a different species entirely?
From a conventional biological standpoint, it absolutely appears impossible. But within the framework of the source material, it is simply the absolute apex of the human evolutionary blueprint. It is the hardware functioning at its maximum theoretical capacity, free of all entropic degradation.
Well, even if Osman isn't technically enlightened by that staggering metric, the side effects of spending 50 years driving his nervous system into these extreme states have fundamentally altered how his brain decodes reality.
They have.
And that leads to the specific nature of his clinical blindness.
Yes. For 2.5 years, the physical optical hardware, the eyes and the optic nerve pathway, have not functioned. But instead of perceiving the black void or the random firing of visual snow known as phosphenes, which is common in clinical blindness, Osman's brain processes the energetic source code of reality.
He perceives the subtle anatomy.
He does. He is literally looking at the wiring diagram of the human machine. The text details his direct observation of the primary energetic currents in the body.
He observes the Ida and the Pingala. In classical yogic anatomy, these are the two foundational nadis, or energy channels, that parallel the spinal cord.
Right, and he perceives them not as abstract concepts, but as distinct visual phenomena with specific colors and textures. He describes the Pingala current, the masculine, solar, highly kinetic energy that correlates with the sympathetic nervous system, as a vibrant, pinkish-red flow.
And the Ida current, the feminine, lunar, restorative energy correlating with the parasympathetic nervous system, is perceived as a bluish-gray flow.
And what provides empirical weight to his vision is his anatomical description of their trajectory. He observes these two distinct currents traveling vertically up the subtle body and then physically crossing over each other at the Ajna chakra, the energetic center located between the eyebrows.
See, and that crossover perfectly mirrors the physical neuroanatomy of the human brain.
It does.
The motor cortex and sensory pathways in the right hemisphere of the brain control the left side of the physical body, and the left hemisphere controls the right side. The nerves literally decussate. They cross over in the brainstem. Osman is visually perceiving the energetic blueprint that dictates our physical neurology.
He terms this constant state of perception twilight vision. What an individual with normal sight perceives as pitch-black darkness in a sealed room, Osman perceives as a continuously illuminated twilight environment.
Wow.
Within this twilight, the bioenergetic fields emitted by people, physical objects, and the structural integrity of a space are entirely visible and readable to him.
It forces you to realize that our normal human eyesight is incredibly limited.
So limited.
Our physical eyes only evolved to interpret a microscopic, highly specific sliver of the actual electromagnetic spectrum. It's almost as if normal human consciousness is stuck listening to a cheap AM radio that's full of static. And Osman, through decades of altering his neural pathways, has somehow figured out how to tune his biological receiver to pick up a high-definition satellite frequency that was always broadcasting right in front of us.
The data stream is omnipresent. The limitation has always been the bandwidth of the biological receiver.
Right. But Osman isn't just passively watching this energetic light show. He is actively manipulating the source code. He steps into the most desperate biological situations imaginable.
Let's break down the mechanics of the emergency room of spirituality.
Yes, and the source carefully distinguishes his profession from general energetic wellness. This is critical care bioenergy healing.
Right. We really need to be clear that this isn't a weekend practitioner holding a crystal over your chest to unblock a chakra so you feel more creatively inspired.
No, not at all.
This isn't about soothing a stress headache. We are analyzing interventions in stage 4 oncology. We are talking about patients locked in deep comas, experiencing cascading, multiple organ failure where life support is the only thing maintaining biological function.
The highest possible stakes.
And the most provocative aspect of this protocol is that Osman performs these massive physiological interventions remotely, often separated from the patient by oceans and continents.
Now, how does remote healing actually function in a physical universe? Because it sounds entirely mystical until you look at the technical analogy he uses. He compares the mechanism directly to WhatsApp.
I love this analogy. It strips away the magical thinking and grounds it in information theory. In a digital network like WhatsApp, a user can instantly transmit a massive complex data file like a high-resolution video to a specific device on the other side of the planet.
And physical distance is entirely irrelevant to the transfer.
Entirely irrelevant, provided the sender has the exact unique IP address or phone number of the receiver. Osman posits that the human nervous system acts as both a highly sensitive energetic transmitter and receiver.
So to initiate the transfer, he essentially has to locate the dying patient's unique energetic IP address.
Precisely. Once his finely tuned consciousness isolates and locks onto the specific energetic signature of the patient, the physical space separating them theoretically collapses. This framework aligns heavily with the principles of quantum non-locality and entanglement,
where two particles, once entangled, instantaneously mirror and influence each other's state regardless of the physical distance separating them.
Exactly. In biological terms, it relates to the concept of morphic resonance and biofield coherence.
But what data is he actually transmitting across that entangled connection? He is very clear that he isn't just sending vague, positive vibes or thoughts and prayers.
No, he is transmitting a highly coherent, intensely structured energetic signal. Think of it as sending a pure software patch to debug a corrupted operating system.
So the patient's failing organs are running on chaotic, entropic code.
Yes. And Osman provides a dominant high-frequency template that forces the failing biology to entrain to a healthier rhythm. Crucially, though, the text outlines his strict limitations. He cannot remotely repair dense structural damage. If a patient has a shattered femur or a physically torn ligament, remote energy cannot mend the tissue. But systemic failures, viral loads, cellular miscommunications, the software issues of the biological machine, those can be reprogrammed.
But opening that quantum connection with a dying body comes with a terrifying mechanical risk. And this completely explains why we don't have thousands of bioenergy healers deployed in every intensive care unit on Earth.
The occupational hazard is profound. When you entangle your biofield with a patient who is in the active process of dying, their system is defined by massive chaotic entropy. Because the energetic channel you have opened is inherently bidirectional, that chaos naturally seeks equilibrium.
Oh, man.
The terminal sickness attempts to rush back up the channel and flood into the healer's own biological system.
So you can't just be a compassionate person. You have to be structurally indestructible. It's like he's had to construct a flawless, energetic hazmat suit for himself.
A perfect metaphor.
A lot of wellness practitioners are safely standing on the sidewalk, sending positive thoughts toward a burning building. Osman is physically running into the inferno to drag a victim out. And the mathematical probability of the building collapsing on him or the fire catching his own suit is terrifyingly high.
If the healer's own subtle anatomy, specifically the causal body and the energetic field, is not fortified like a fortress, the entropy will overwhelm them. They will literally absorb the terminal pathology of the patient and potentially die themselves. It requires an unfathomable degree of structural integrity.
Which introduces a massive, almost glaring paradox in the middle of this deep dive.
It does.
If these historical spiritual masters possess this unfathomable power, if they can suspend their biology, bend time, rewrite quantum software, and heal stage 4 organ failure remotely, why do they themselves succumb to disease and die?
It is the paradox of master mortality. And the historical data is entirely transparent about this reality. The source lists several prominent examples.
Yeah, you have Ramakrishna, one of the most revered mystics in history, who suffered and died from throat cancer. His brilliant primary disciple, Vivekananda, died from complications related to diabetes when he was only 39 years old. Even Yogananda, who we discussed earlier, died in his 50s.
It creates severe cognitive dissonance for the observer. If someone possesses the source code of reality, how can they fail to cure their own biological breakdown?
Exactly.
Osman reframes this paradox completely by forcing us to differentiate between the capacity to heal and the choice to remain.
Well, let's look at the capacity part first, because the text includes a story that proves they absolutely possess the granular control over physical matter to fix their bodies. It details an event where Yogananda, challenged by a skeptic, literally regrew a lost adult tooth purely through energetic focus.
Which defies every known law of modern biology.
Completely defies it, just to demonstrate that the physical form is entirely malleable.
The capacity to manipulate and repair their own cellular structure is historically documented. Therefore, their physical deaths are not a failure of power, but a complete lack of desire to sustain the physical vehicle. Osman utilizes a brutal, highly illustrative analogy to explain their perspective on physical life. The squatter camp versus the palace.
Yeah, I found this analogy incredibly stark.
He asks us to view the physical world, this dense biological reality governed by gravity, defined by constant cellular decay, requiring endless consumption of food, vulnerable to viruses and pain, as a squatter camp.
A squatter camp, that's kind of bleak.
It is inherently dirty, it is deeply stressful, and existence here is a continuous grinding struggle for baseline survival.
And what are they comparing it to?
They are comparing it to the higher dimensions, the domain where the fully developed causal body, the permanent quantum blueprint of the consciousness resides. Osman describes this state of existence as an absolute palace, a 5-star hotel of effortless light and coherence.
So if you have a 5-star hotel, why do they ever leave the palace to come down here to the squatter camp?
Masters only incarnate into the squatter camp to execute a highly specific, targeted mission. They descend to deliver a crucial paradigm-shifting piece of knowledge, to recalibrate a cultural trajectory, or to initiate a specific energetic movement.
So it's just a job.
Yes. They willingly put on the heavy, agonizingly uncomfortable hazmat suit of a physical human body strictly to do a job.
And when the job is over,
The moment the mission parameters are fulfilled, they have absolutely zero internal motivation to linger in the squatter camp. They allow the physical hazmat suit to degrade, or they actively discard it. In the yogic tradition, this is termed mahasamadhi, the conscious, perfectly timed, intentional exit from the physical vehicle.
So they aren't losing a battle with cancer or diabetes. They're simply checking out of a rough motel because it's time to return to the palace.
Precisely.
I I hear the logic of that framework, but I have to step in for the skeptical listener here. If we look at this objectively, isn't calling it a choice just a brilliant, unfalsifiable alibi?
Oh, of course.
It sounds an awful lot like someone saying, "Oh, I totally possess the power to cure my terminal throat cancer. I just don't feel like it." It neatly covers up the fact that biology eventually defeats everyone.
And that skepticism is an absolutely necessary defense mechanism for the rational mind. From a strictly materialist framework, it is an alibi. But if we grant the premise of the source material, if we accept that consciousness is primary and the physical body is merely a temporary, highly restrictive terminal, it fundamentally alters the definition of what constitutes a healing.
Right.
To a master, utilizing massive amounts of vital energy to forcefully repair a decaying physical body just to spend another decade in the squatter camp would be a failure of logic. Leaving the broken body behind is the ultimate, final healing.
Okay, so if we accept this vast framework, the high-efficiency alpha states, the cellular reconstruction of delta, the crushing biochemical voltage of samadhi, the ability to read the energetic source code hearing about these staggering apex levels of human capability, naturally forces the question, how does an average person achieve that?
Right, what's the path?
And the answer the text provides completely annihilates the modern wellness industry's obsession with 30-day challenges and weekend retreats.
It dismantles the illusion of spiritual instant gratification entirely. Osman shares a deeply sobering story from his own early training. As an eager, ambitious young student, he approached his teacher and asked the inevitable question, how long will it take me to reach the goal? When will I attain full enlightenment?
And his teacher just looks at him and delivers this deadpan answer, it will take you 10 million years.
10 million years. It is a timeline so vast it breaks the human capacity to conceptualize it. But the teacher goes on to explain exactly why the evolutionary process requires that duration. He explains the concept of samskaras.
Okay, what are samskaras, mechanically speaking?
They are deep subconscious impressions. You can think of them as epigenetic trauma, ancestral genetic baggage, and the dense neurological grooves created by every reactive thought, fear, and action accumulated over thousands of lifetimes.
Wow.
When you sit down to meditate, you aren't just dealing with the residual stress of a bad day at the office. You are confronting the accumulated psychological and energetic density of millions of years of brutal evolutionary survival.
And the requirement is that every single one of those microscopic grooves has to be meticulously cleaned out and rewired.
It is a forced, active process of biological and energetic evolution. You do not accidentally stumble into permanent enlightenment. The text outlines the agonizingly slow stages. First, the practitioner must completely purify and perfect the dense physical body.
Which takes long enough on its own.
Exactly. Once the physical hardware is stabilized, they must systematically develop and refine the subtle energy body. And only after the energy body is perfectly calibrated can they begin the incomprehensible work of constructing the causal body, the light body that survives physical death.
Which directly connects back to our discussion about the physical danger of samadhi. You need that causal body fully constructed and reinforced just to survive the crushing, continuous voltage of living in a permanent state of bliss without your nervous system collapsing.
That's the key.
It's almost like, imagine trying to plug a cheap kitchen toaster into the main line of a nuclear reactor. If you haven't done the millions of years of preparatory upgrades, the toaster isn't going to suddenly become enlightened. The wiring is just going to violently melt.
The physical nervous system will shatter. The psychological framework will fracture into complete psychosis. The 10 million years is not a punitive sentence handed down by a cruel universe. It is simply the minimum required timeline to safely upgrade the biological hardware so it can withstand the raw current of absolute reality.
So we have covered an immense amount of conceptual and biological ground today.
We really have.
And the practical reality is that you, the listener, driving to work right now or listening while doing the dishes, probably do not have 10 million spare years to dedicate to sensory withdrawal in a Himalayan cave.
Most likely not.
So how do we actually apply this dense source material to a normal human life?
The profound utility of this framework is that it scales to any level of application. You do not need to be aiming for Mahasamadhi or attempting to develop twilight vision to radically alter your baseline reality. Simply applying the mechanics of the alpha state learning to consciously downregulate the nervous system from chronic sympathetic beta panic to parasympathetic stability can literally save your career.
Absolutely.
It can lower your blood pressure and salvage your relationships from the ravaging effects of continuous stress.
You don't have to be a mystic to realize you need to take your foot off the brake while you drive.
Exactly.
And understanding the vital physics of delta sleep completely changes how you treat your nights. When you realize that delta is the only state where cellular repair and neurotoxin flushing occurs, you stop biologically sabotaging yourself. You protect that sleep architecture from alcohol and late-night digital stimulation because you know it is the bedrock of your physical survival.
Furthermore, observing Osman's extreme critical care interventions forces a necessary humility upon our modern scientific arrogance. When we encounter phenomena that are labeled impossible by current allopathic medicine, we must remember that impossible merely means that a phenomenon operates on mechanics that are currently beyond our limited materialist instruments.
Right.
The energetic source code is real, whether we have the bandwidth to perceive it or not.
And that leads us to the final, incredibly provocative concept that the source material leaves us with. It's a philosophical thought experiment that challenges the very foundation of what we consider to be real. It is known as the mosquito analogy.
It is a profound recalibration of subjective perspective. Consider the life cycle of a common mosquito. From birth to death, its entire existence spans roughly 2 weeks.
That's 2 weeks.
Within the subjective experience of that mosquito, those 2 weeks constitute a full, traumatic, and intensely real lifetime. It hunts, it feeds, it reproduces, it desperately fights to avoid being crushed. To the mosquito, its timeline is vast and all-encompassing. But we, operating from a human perspective, observe that 2-week span and perceive it as a tiny, almost insignificant blip in time.
Okay, now layer our own biological experience of dreaming over that concept. When you fall asleep tonight and enter a REM cycle dream, that dream environment feels entirely, undeniably solid and real to you. You feel genuine terror if you are cased. You feel the physical sensation of falling. You experience joy.
It's all real.
The dream is your absolute, unquestioned reality right up until the exact millisecond you open your eyes and wake up in your bed.
So we must synthesize these facts. If we know empirically that time can be radically distorted, where 18 hours of delta meditation is subjectively experienced as 20 minutes, and if we know that a mosquito's 2-week lifespan feels like an eternity to the mosquito, we have to ask the ultimate question.
Which is,
Are we currently just the mosquito?
wow. Is this incredibly solid waking world with our mortgages, our commutes, our deep dives, our entire 80-year human lifespan simply a much longer, slightly higher definition dream? A dream that feels entirely real, but that we just haven't figured out the biological mechanism to wake up from yet.
It suggests that the reality we cling to is merely a temporary fluctuation in a much larger, unseen continuum.
Well, I can guarantee that thought is going to keep you staring at the ceiling tonight. But hopefully you'll be pondering the nature of reality from a highly productive, deeply stable alpha state. Because ultimately, whether you are trying to survive the boardroom or navigate the squatter camp, we are all just trying to figure out how to stop relying on the flashlight and start looking for the sun. We'll see you next time.